So, this past hunting season, I shot the biggest buck of my life. And quite honestly, probably the biggest buck I will ever shoot. In our area here, we have a lot of 130, 140 class deer, um, but we see very little that hit the 180 mark. Um, every few years, you'll hear of one get shot that's over 180. Normally, but once a year in the area, you'll hear of someone shooting an 180 class deer. Normally, if there's anything over that, it's pretty rare. And so I was fortunate enough to get one of those 180 class deer this year. Unfortunately, I did not get very much footage of it at all. It happened pretty fast. And so I didn't really film anything at all. However, there's a bit of a story behind this deer, and so I figured I'd just make a video telling the story of my biggest buck. So it started about 3 years ago in 2021, I believe. I heard about this big buck. I didn't hear where it was or anything. I just heard that there was a big buck in, the greater area. So like 50-mile radius of where I lived, within there was this big buck. Never thought much of it. Chances of me finding him are slim. And so I never gave it much more thought until the next year, which would have been last year. I was hunting whitetails, and it was towards the end of the season. I had about 2 weeks left. I ran across this buck, and he was a nice buck, and I decided to take him. He was an old buck. I could tell he was not very healthy. And in fact, when I shot him, I didn't actually end up eating most of the meat because he had a big abscess on his ribs, all bruised up. He was limping. I honestly doubt he would have made the winter. Anyway, so I decided to take him. He was super wide, 25 inches wide, but short tines. His G4s were broken off on both antlers. He ended up scoring like a 135 or something like that. It wasn't nothing special. Anyway, the day after, I was on my way to work, and I decided to just drive up into this field because my wife still had a whitetail tag and I had a little time, so I look around, and I pull out into this field, and I see this whitetail buck out in the field. Pull up my binoculars, and I was like, wow, this is the biggest deer I think I had ever seen at the time. And so I was pretty excited, but there was nothing I could do. I had folded my tag the day before, and so I pulled up my spotting scope, put my phone on it, took a couple of videos of him as he took off across the field. Anyway, that was that. I was like, well, the chances of him making he might make the winter, but I wasn't too hopeful. And there's a lot of other people hunting this property. The guy pretty much gives permission to anyone. So I had permission, and also half the guys in the community have permission on this land. However, not a lot of guys hunt it for some reason. It's my great spot. I love it, but thankfully there's not a lot of people that hunt it. So I just left out of there, didn't want to spook him off. I backed out of there as he moved off across the field, and thought maybe I'd come back with my wife. Anyway, we came back multiple times, never seen him again. So then this year I had a muley buck tag, which most the time around here you only get your muley buck tag 4 to 5 years. It's on a draw. It takes 4 to 5 years to draw it, and I had gotten it. So most of my effort was going into hunting muleys, and I hadn't even thought of hunting whitetails yet. And I mean, this was beginning November, actually November 1st. I decided to set up a trail camera in a spot where I knew there was whitetails. And on my way in, driving down this county road, dead end road, on my right hand side of the road as I was driving in, I seen some does, and I stopped, glassed out in the field, just seen a couple does, no bucks. Carried on in, and this was late in the morning. I mean, I think my shooting light was around 8 that morning, and this was closer to 9. A couple does out there. So I carried on, set up my camera, came back out, and on my way out, looked back into this field where those does had been, and those does were gone. But I just seen as I was driving down the road over in Knob, like, man, that looked like antlers. So I drove a little further, and sure enough, I seen antlers. And it was kind of foggy at the time. I didn't get a good look at him, so I drove past, didn't want to stop right there, knowing he'd run off. Also, I was needing to get to work, so I couldn't shoot him. But I pulled up my spotting scope, put my phone on it. I'd driven by at this point, drove past behind some bush, stopped, and then walked back down the road. Put up my spotting scope. I didn't think he was that big. I wasn't super excited about anything. I was just, I like to take pictures of bucks that I come across. And I put my spotting scope on him, and I was, wow. This buck was the biggest buck I had seen in my life, besides maybe that one that ran across my headlights some years ago. I didn't get a good look at him, but he looked huge. So this was the first one I'd really gotten a look at. He's wide, tall. For our area, he's a great buck. But I had to get to work. He didn't give me a shot anyway. He moved off into this little strip of willows that ran across this whole field. And this was at 9:30 or 10 in the morning. So I decided to just leave him alone, because at that time in the morning, I doubted he was going to go pretty far. I was pretty sure he was going to bed down in those willows and probably just stay there. The does were in the area. I knew them. I seen them there all the time. The does pretty much lived in that little area. And there's not a lot of bush, but there's enough that as long as they don't get spooked, they would bed down in there. So that evening, I decided to go back. I had about an hour till shooting light. I picked up my wife. She wanted to come with me. She was 8 months pregnant, but she wanted to come with me. So I picked her up. We went out there. We drove the road, looking, pickup hunting. And so when we came back, we drove back into where I'd set my camera down the road past. There's no deer there in the field. Actually, no, that's not true. There was a couple of does again, but the buck wasn't there. So we drove in, and then when I was coming out, I told my wife, I'm going to stop about half a mile back, and I'm just going to walk up this county road. It's a dead-end road, no traffic, and there's a bush strip on the right-hand side of the road, and then the open fields with a couple patches of willows in the left side of the road. So I told my wife I'll walk on the right, on the other side of that bush strip along the county road, and just walk up there and see maybe he popped out. So I'll get there right at shooting light, or just, a couple minutes before. And so as I was she decided to come with me. So it was a little slower going. She was 8 months pregnant, so she wasn't walking too fast. And we walked up this bush line, and I seen the does once we got closer, but they spotted me. I don't know if they winded me. I thought my wind was good. Anyway, they got onto me. The bush strip was pretty thin. I couldn't really get good cover. So anyway, these does just took off running into this one strip of willows where the buck had ran into. And so we're like, well, that was over. There's no buck there anyway. But then I thought, if these does run through that strip of willows, it's only 50 yards wide, not even. If that buck did bed down in there like I suspected that morning, they might push him out. He might come out. And so I told my wife, I'm going to run up here. At this point, I have 5 minutes left of shooting light. And so I told my wife, I'm going to run past this willow, hoping that they would come through and that buck would follow them out. And so as I started to jog up there, forgetting about cover, at this point, I was like, just maybe he would bump out of there. And as I got close to the willows, I seen the does. They're already 100 yards through the bush strip, and they were moving across. They must have winded me. They were out of there. And I was standing on the road, ready to walk back. I was like, okay, well, this is done. Go get the truck, pick up my wife, go home. Anyway, as I turned around to leave, I noticed a darker spot. I mean, he was up against the bush. I pulled up my binoculars, and all I see is this buck. And I was like, wow. I was like, okay, I gotta make this happen. Looked at my phone quickly. At this point, the buck hadn't seen me yet. I was kind of on the willows. And I had like 2 minutes of shooting light. So I run across the road, get into this little field, out in the open. I don't know how he didn't see me anyway. He was right up against the bush. And he started to come out, and I got set up on a fence post, put him in my crosshairs, and I was breathing hard. I mean, the buck fever hit hard. And so he started coming towards me, and I'm like, man, I gotta be out of time, or like, I gotta make this happen. So finally, he just stopped facing me, and I squeezed off around at about 100 yards, and I felt myself move as I shot. But I heard a hit. It was a solid hit. I mean, I was shooting a 300 Win Mag because it's all I had at the moment. The scope was shot on my deer gun that I normally went and hadn't bought a new scope yet. So I was shooting a 300 Win Mag that I'd set up to hunt elk, and I'd already got my elk, but it was my only rifle. So shot him, and I seen him packing his leg, but he turned, and I loaded up another round because he didn't go down instantly. Normally, if you shoot him with a Win Mag and you get a good hit, they go down pretty quick. Anyway, he turned, walked 10 yards. He was packing his leg, so I decided to put another round in him, and that round was, perfect double lung shot. He went down instantly, and yeah, that was pretty exciting. Waited for my wife to get there. We gave him a couple minutes, walked up on him, and yeah, it was a pretty amazing experience. Put my hands on a buck that, I'll probably never get another one of that class. Most guys never even get an opportunity to shoot a buck like that in this area. So I'm really thankful for that. He's just got these crazy G2s. One side splits off on both. Has 2 kickers on the G2s. The other side has 1. And his gross score is 181. So he has some differences in there. That was my rough score, I should say. It's just a rough score. The taxidermy hasn't let me know on the score his score yet. He was going to score. But anyway, yeah, so I was able to harvest my biggest deer ever, probably the biggest one I'll get. And man, it was a crazy experience. I wasn't even hunting whitetails. I was looking for mule deer and ran across this buck that, and I'd heard of a lot of people talking about him since the first year, last year when I seen him. I heard other people talking about him because they'd seen him as well. And so there was a lot of other people hunting him. So I feel pretty fortunate that I was in the right place at the right time, which is all it really was, and that I managed to get him. So anyway, that's the story of my biggest buck of my life.